hyfntv viewers, it is time to check out once again what's the haps with the maps. Now starting off, we are going to head to Africa, and we have some wonderful news being reported out of Nigeria. It looks like their arts and reading community is growing in numbers. Now a few years back there were festivals taking place, however they ended up fading out. But recently, with the help of social media, the festivals are taking place and giving rise to the love of literature. There are book, arts, all kinds of festivals, all established to give attendees the opportunity to engage. Great job there, especially with all of the negative news happening. It's always good to see a good cause coming up. Next up is Ethiopia. We reported a while back regarding the ongoing conflict in the Tigray region and the essence of war breaking out. Well, there was a peace agreement last month, and that included restoring telecom and electrical services, and even Ethiopian airline flights are set to resume. Now this won't be right away, but should be able to be taking place in about 18 months. And this peace agreement ended a near 2-year conflict. Now moving to South Africa in Cape Town, there is a garden known as Gorilla Garden. And what does that mean exactly? It is occupying an open space and turning it into a food forest. Now this is a community effort that allows for produce growth and trade and selling for the benefit of the community. Those involved also learn from one another different gardening ways. And each also does their own part to provide what they can for others for their gardens, such as holding on to produce and vegetables to make compost. If you have a chance, check out the story called Gorilla Garden on Al Jazeera's website. It's a beautiful solution to ongoing food problems and a way to build community. Now let's talk about Asia. First up in China, we talked about their strict COVID lockdowns and policies in place, and then again how the Chinese government was releasing those protocols in response to the wave of protests. Well, since China has increasingly opened their doors, other parts of the world are starting to close theirs. Now what this means is countries like Japan and India have placed travel bans on visitors from China due to the massive surge of severe cases occurring across China. Those who travel from China will be subject to antigen tests and restricted to the number of airports they can arrive in. Now moving over to Myanmar, refugees are trying to escape and taking on impossibly difficult journeys by way of boat to escape persecution. Just this last week, around 185 Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar washed upon the shore along Indonesia. Now this persecution has been going on since 2017, and at least more than 1 million Muslims have fled the Buddhist majority Myanmar. Now conflict is happening all around the world. It's always good to do a little research to see what everyone is fighting for. Let us know what you think by hashtagging us at #HYFNTV. Now on to the Middle East. In Afghanistan, the Taliban has been making new laws regarding women, and this time it concerns their ability to work in NGOs, or non-governmental organizations. NGOs are another topic we have discussed in the past, and they provide humanitarian assistance to different countries. Now, according to the Taliban, women are no longer allowed to work in these companies, and this has resulted in many nonprofits removing themselves from the country in response to the restrictions. Now, this is a huge issue because without the NGOs' help, many women, children, and men who are in need will remain without. The Taliban's reasoning behind this is regarding women failing to observe the Islamic hijab and other rules pertaining to females working. And the frustration is continuing to rise, and adding to it is the ban on women attending universities that was just announced last week as well. With the rise of protests happening around the world, we will see what happens here in Afghanistan and make sure to keep you updated. Now in Iran, protests have continued despite a slight decrease, and those ongoing protests are still in the response to the death of Mahsa Amini, whose death was resulted after being detained by the morality police. Now, the Islamic regime as a whole has not been fully deterred. However, the protests have sparked worldwide attention and are anticipated to continue into 2023. Now, reports do indicate the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have all imposed human rights sanctions in response to what they call brutal suppression of protesters. Now let's take our focus over to Europe and talk about the war still going on between Russia and Ukraine. Russian air bases continue to be a target for the Ukrainian military. This week, another 3 Russians were killed in the strike, which was actually the result of the Russian military striking down the Ukrainian drone, and the debris caused these deaths. The shelling on the front lines in Ukraine continues, along with the Russians' attempt to affect the power grid for Ukraine, which would result in the loss of electricity. Aside from the constant battle, let's talk about the aid flowing into Ukraine. We discussed this once before near the beginning of the war, and the numbers have increased quite drastically since then. Let's take the United States, for example. President Joe Biden just recently pledged another $45 billion in support for Ukraine. And if it passes, it will bring the total to almost $100 billion. Now, we will have to wait for Congress to decide if they want to approve the proposal. However, the number is astronomical. In fact, it dwarfs any other country's participation, including the EU as a whole, who is currently around $34 billion. And this has prompted some to call this war nothing other than a proxy war by the US. What are your thoughts? Don't forget to hashtag us at hyfntv. In other European news, this time in Spain, their government has announced a $10 billion aid package in an effort to decrease the pain felt by its residents due to the rising inflation. Now, this includes a one-time bonus for certain households and tax cut extensions. It also accomplishes placing a limit on gas prices and cutting taxes on essential foods such as milk, vegetables, bread, and more. And as for travel, subsidies will be given along with restrictions on rent increases. And let's wrap up today's show with news right here in the US and even closer to home here in Arizona. It has become news all around the globe that major election hearings were held in our backyard and the eyes of the world were watching. Now, these included the governor's race, the attorney general, and secretary of state. All of the lawsuits have been dismissed. It was definitely interesting to watch, so if you have a moment, go to YouTube and check out the trials. Up next, it proves fraud does not pay. Former FTX chief executive Sam Bankman-Fried is accused of fraud charges, which resulted in the collapse of his cryptocurrency exchange company, FTX. The U.S. Department of Justice is stating he caused billions of dollars worth of losses. He was just released on a $250 million bond and is supposed to remain under the custody of his parents in California. And finally, recently announced amid the Twitter files, the FBI has paid over $3 million to Twitter to censor alternative views the government wanted silenced. If you haven't had a moment to go on Twitter and check out the release of these documents, go ahead and do so and then see for yourself what's been going on. Thank you for joining me here on HYFN TV. That was your news around the world, and you can also check out a lot of other segments. Head to our on-demand section at hyfntv.com.